Today, under the sermon titled, Father Ahnsahnghong is God, Christ, who came a second time, let us summarize answers one by one to the question, why is Father Ahnsahnghong God, Christ, who came a second time? We are often asked, why is Christ Ahnsahnghong God? Why do you believe Christ Ahnsahnghong is God? When this happens, most of the children of Zion reply, the answers are all in the Bible. We testify about Christ Ahnsahnghong through subjects like the prophecy of King David, God who built Zion, the order of Melchizedek, and the tree of life and Christ Ahnsahnghong. People who want to hear the word of God often want a short and simple answer about the conclusion as to why we believe Christ Ahnsahnghong is God. Therefore, when they ask, why is Christ Ahnsahnghong God? Let us reply, He is God because He established Zion. Since the Bible testifies that God Himself will establish Zion, let us study the prophecies concerning Zion through the Bible. Let's open Psalm 102 together. In Psalm chapter 102, verse 16, it says, For the Lord will rebuild Zion and appear in His glory. According to Psalm chapter 102, verse 16, Zion is not a place that can be built by men. Zion is the place that can only be appointed by God. Only God can establish Zion. Let's take a look at the same words in Psalm chapter 87, verse 1. He has set His foundation on the holy mountain. The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are said of you, O city of God, Selah. I will record Rahab and Babylon among those who acknowledge me, Philistia too and Tyre along with Cush, and will say, this one was born in Zion. Indeed, of Zion it will be said, this one and that one were born in her. And the Most High Himself. The Most High means the Most Supreme. It is one of the titles of God. What will the Most High, that is God, do? He Himself will establish her. As we look at the words in Psalm chapter 102 and Psalm chapter 87, the Bible explains that it is God who builds Zion. Then, what kind of place is Zion that God will establish? What specific characteristics does Zion have so that we can recognize it? Let us turn to Isaiah chapter 33, verse 20. When we look into the book of Isaiah chapter 33, verse 20, God describes the church that celebrates His feasts as Zion. Look upon Zion, the city of our festivals. Your eyes will see Jerusalem, a peaceful abode, a tent that will not be moved. This does not mean that there are 2 or 3 different types of Zion that God established, but only one Zion. A tent that will not be moved. Its stakes will never be pulled up, nor any of its ropes broken. There the Lord will be our mighty one. In Zion, the city of God's feasts, God will be our mighty one. It will be like a place of broad rivers and streams. No galley with oars will ride them, no mighty ship will sail them. For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king. It is He who will save us. Zion, which God promised to rebuild, is the place where God's feasts are celebrated. The Bible testifies that Zion is the church that celebrates God's feasts. However, when we look at the history of Christianity in the 4th century, All the truths of the new covenant, from the Sabbath day to the Passover, were destroyed one by one during the Dark Ages. We first need to understand why God said He will rebuild Zion, the city of God's feasts. To better understand about God's feasts, let us see Leviticus chapter 23. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 23, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, 'These are my appointed feasts, the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies.'" In other words, God's appointed feasts are in the following verses. Let's continue with verse 3. "There are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work. Wherever you live, it is," what is it? "A Sabbath to the Lord." God said, "These are the appointed feasts of the Lord," and in verse 3, He mentions the Sabbath day as one of those feasts. Let's move on to verse 4. "These are the Lord's appointed feasts, the sacred assemblies you are to proclaim at their appointed times. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month." Among God's feasts, there is the Passover that begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. Here, God first mentions the Sabbath day, the weekly feast, and then explains the annual feasts that are kept once a year. Let's read verse 5 again. "The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. On the 15th day of that month, the Lord's Feast of Unleavened Bread begins." The Passover is God's feast, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is also God's feast. Let us move on to verse 9. "The Lord also said to Moses, 'Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you and you reap its harvest, bring to the high priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest.'" As they were to offer a sheaf of the first grain they harvested, it was named the Day of First Fruits. Here, God taught them how to keep the Day of First Fruits. Let's move on to verse 15. "From the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, meaning from the Feast of First Fruits, count off 7 full weeks." As it mentions 7 full weeks, the number of days included in the 7 full weeks is 7 times 7, which equals 49 days. Then, from Sunday, count off 49 days. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath. In the Bible, it is called the Feast of Weeks, and also called the Day of Pentecost. In Acts chapter 2, it is written as the Day of Pentecost, which indicates 50th. All these feasts are God's feasts. They are the Sabbath day, the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Day of First Fruits, and the Feast of Weeks, Day of Pentecost. Let us also take a look at the Feast of Trumpets. Let us move on to verse 23. "The Lord said to Moses, 'Say to the Israelites, on the first day of the 7th month, by the sacred calendar, you are to have a day of rest, a sacred assembly commemorated with trumpet blasts. Do no regular work, but present an offering made to the Lord by fire.'" The first day of the 7th month by the sacred calendar is the Feast of Blowing Trumpets in preparation for the Day of Atonement. 10 days later, the Day of Atonement is held for the purpose of atonement for all the sins Israel had committed during the year. It is a feast to remind the people through the trumpet blasts that the Day of Atonement is drawing near. Let's see verse 26. "The Lord said to Moses, 'The 10th day of this 7th month is the Day of Atonement. Hold a sacred assembly.'" There are the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement among God's feasts. Let's move on to verse 33. "The Lord said to Moses, 'Say to the Israelites, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Lord's Feast of Tabernacles begins.'" All these feasts are God's feasts. In Isaiah chapter 33, the place where God's feasts are kept is described as Zion. In Psalm chapter 102, it is written that God is the one who will rebuild Zion. All these feasts of life had been kept and observed continuously for 1,500 years, starting from the time of Moses to the time of Jesus Christ. These regulations of keeping the Sabbath day and the Passover were changed into the regulation of the New Covenant by Jesus. In the Old Testament, lambs or goats were sacrificed as sin offerings for sinners. In the regulation of the truth called the New Covenant, lambs and goats are no longer used as sin offerings, but Christ's own body is offered. God's body became the reality of all the sin offerings for mankind. This is the most significant difference between the regulations for the sacrifices in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Then, let us take a look at the scene where Jesus established all the regulations of the New Covenant when he came to this earth. Let us turn to Luke chapter 22, verse 7. In chapter 22, verse 7, it says, "Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed." Regarding the Passover, God said in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 4, "These are the Lord's appointed feasts. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month." The Passover is the name of the feast. The Passover is God's feast. Let's take a closer look at how Jesus kept this feast. Then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." Let's see the scene of eating the Passover in verse 19. "And he took bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, 'This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you.'" As we read, for whom was the regulation of the new covenant established? Jesus said, "This is for you." Jesus is God who came to this earth in the flesh. He came to this earth and established a feast for the salvation and the forgiveness of sins for all mankind. This feast is the Passover of the New Covenant. According to Exodus chapter 12, in the Old Testament, the regulation of keeping the Passover was to sacrifice a lamb or a goat, put the blood on the sides and tops of the door frames, and eat the meat roasted over the fire. However, in the regulation of keeping the Passover of the New Covenant, Jesus Christ became the sin offering for the sins of all mankind. Since there is no need to shed the blood of animals any longer, how did Jesus keep the Passover? He kept it with bread and wine. He gave us the Passover wine, saying, "This is my blood, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." According to the law of the Old Testament, we had to slaughter a sheep or a goat to shed its blood. God gave us this regulation of the truth of the New Covenant and completed the salvation of mankind before he ascended to heaven. However, all these regulations for the sacrifices were destroyed by Satan. Then, did God let Satan do so because he lacked the power to stop him? No. It is already prophesied through the prophets that the regulation of the truth of the New Covenant will be trampled on. Let us take a look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, to find out how the truth will be trampled on. Let's take a look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. "He will speak against the Most High." The Most High here refers to God. He will speak against God. Since he speaks against God, can't we clearly identify who he is? Satan will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. It is already prophesied that he will change the laws God has appointed. About 2,000 years ago, God came to this earth in the flesh in the name of Jesus and established the feasts, the Sabbath of the New Covenant and the Passover of the New Covenant. They were not the regulations that were established through the blood of animals according to the law of Moses. Jesus Christ established these regulations through his body 2,000 years ago. Nevertheless, the Bible and the prophets already prophesied about the work of Satan. He will change the set times and the laws. According to the Word of God, what happened to God's feasts on this earth? In AD 321, the Sabbath day disappeared, and in AD 325, the Passover disappeared. We already know this through historical facts, through the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. As God's feasts were abolished, what was the status of Zion? Zion was ruined and destroyed. Therefore, God must rebuild Zion. No one was ever able to find the feasts, including the Sabbath day, that were abolished. The Seventh-day Adventist Church knows that the Sabbath day is important through the Bible, but their Sabbath day begins on Friday. They believe that the Sabbath day begins around 6 p.m. on Friday evening when the sun sets. However, Friday is just a preparation day. The Sabbath day should be Saturday. The day begins when the sun rises. It doesn't make any sense that the day begins when the sun sets. Thus, they have been keeping the Sabbath day incorrectly from Friday evening. They may have the word the Sabbath day, but they are not keeping the true Sabbath day in the way God commanded. Also, as we diligently preach the Passover, many people copy the name Passover and say, "We keep the Passover on January 14th by the solar calendar. No one eats bread or drinks wine. We just need faith. Why do we have to eat it?" They are teaching these things now. Although there are weeds that are similar to wheat, we can realize that they do not function as wheat. Then, who must rebuild Zion with the new covenant? Without God, Zion cannot be rebuilt. The Bible prophesies that God will come to this earth again and restore the regulations of the truth that had been destroyed during the Dark Ages and that no one had kept for over 1,600 years. Let's take a look at Psalm chapter 102 once again. In Psalm chapter 102, verse 13, it says, "You will arise and have compassion on Zion, for it is time to show favor to her. The appointed time has come." When God's appointed time comes, God will show favor to Zion, which has been destroyed, and He will rebuild and restore Zion so that it can function properly. For it is time to show favor to her. The appointed time has come. For her stones are dear to your servants. Her very dust moves them to pity. The nations will fear the name of the Lord. All the kings of the earth will revere your glory. For the Lord will rebuild. What will He rebuild? Zion, and appear in His glory. Here, we should understand that this is not the first time God builds Zion. Here, written in this verse, it is described as God will rebuild Zion, meaning God will build Zion a second time. In the English Bible, it is clearly written that God will rebuild Zion. Jesus came to this earth 2,000 years ago and established the regulations of the truth of the new covenant. He made atonement for the sins of mankind, not with the blood of animals, but with His precious blood. He opened the way of salvation and eternal life for mankind. Aren't the Sabbath day and the Passover spiritual sacrifices to God? These sacrifices were abolished during the Dark Ages. Naturally, all the feasts of the New Covenant were also abolished. At that time, the Christians thought, Christianity must be different from that of Judaism. Therefore, we will not keep the feasts that the Jews keep. For this reason, they began to view all the ceremonies that Jesus performed not as the New Covenant, but as the things the Jews keep. Similarly, today, Christians insist Passover is a Jewish feast, and the Sabbath day is also a Jewish feast. They cannot view them as the truth of the new covenant that Jesus established because they have become spiritually blind. This is why it is written in Psalm chapter 102 that the Lord, Jehovah, will rebuild Zion. Then, this is a role that only God can carry out. It is impossible for any false prophet or theologian to do this work. Even though there are so many theologians and Bible scholars who study the Bible, we must keep the Passover. We must keep the Sabbath day correctly. We must keep God's feasts properly. No one ever gave these teachings until Father Ahnsahnghong came to this earth and taught them to us. Why is that? It is because all of this is already prophesied in Psalm chapter 102, verse 16. It is because only God, not man, will establish Zion. God will establish Zion, the city of God's feasts, meaning He will restore all the laws of the feasts that have been destroyed. Is there any religious organization in the world that correctly keeps the 7 feasts in 3 times, from the Passover to the Feast of Tabernacles? Except for the Church of God, there is none. What does this mean? Who dwells in the Church of God? Who established Zion? Doesn't this mean that God dwells in the Church of God? Who awakened us to the 7 feasts in 3 times of the New Covenant? Who taught us about the Sabbath day? Who proclaimed the truth of salvation and led us to the kingdom of heaven? From whom did we learn these teachings? Didn't we learn them from Christ Ahnsahnghong? Then, Christ Ahnsahnghong is the one who established Zion. If He established Zion according to the prophecy, He is God. Isn't the work of building Zion the work that only God can do? Let's read verse 17 again. He will respond to the prayer of the destitute. He will not despise their plea. Let this be written for a future generation, that a people not yet created may praise the Lord. The Lord looked down from His sanctuary on high. From heaven He viewed the earth, to hear the groans of the prisoners and release those condemned to death. So the name of the Lord will be declared in Zion and His praise in Jerusalem, when the peoples and the kingdoms assemble to worship the Lord. It is written, when God rebuilds Zion, all the peoples of the world will worship and revere God together. Only God can rebuild Zion in accordance with the prophecies of the Bible and the prophets. Then, when the one who rebuilds Zion appears and asks us, just as He asked Peter, "Who do you say I am?" how should we answer? We should answer by saying, "You are our God. You are God, our Savior, who will save us." Shouldn't we give Him this answer? It is because it is written in Psalm chapter 102, verse 16, the one who rebuilds Zion is God. We all believe in the Bible. We also believe that we must neither add to nor take away from the words of the Bible. Since we believe in the words of the Bible, if the one who establishes Zion appears on this earth, we must not regard him as an ordinary man like us. Who is he? He is our God. Christ Ahnsahnghong came to this earth and taught us all the truth of the new covenant. Isn't this why we are able to come here today? Many people ask, why do you believe that Christ Ahnsahnghong is God, Christ who came a second time? To this question, let us answer, Christ Ahnsahnghong is God because he established Zion. Is this in the Bible? Of course it is. Show them Psalm chapter 102, verse 16. Isn't it written in this verse that God will rebuild Zion? What is Zion? There are physical Zion and spiritual Zion in the Bible. According to Isaiah chapter 33, verse 20, the spiritual Zion that God will rebuild is the place where God's feasts are kept. There are many theologians and scholars who study the Bible. Even though it is clearly contained in the 66 books of the Bible, they could not find this truth about Zion. It is because they are not God. The reason is this simple. Who is Christ Ahnsahnghong that he taught his children to keep the Passover of the New Covenant and the 7 feasts in 3 times? He is God. He proclaimed the truth for the salvation of his children. The appointed time has come when God will show favor to Zion, as it is written in Psalm chapter 102, verse 13. Let us once again engrave the teachings of the Psalms in our hearts. Every time I read the Bible, I can see how much sacrifice and effort father and mother have made in order to deliver the truth of life to us without letting Satan take away this truth again. God intertwined numerous prophecies, psalms, letters, and revelations in the Bible. Therefore, when a man reads the Bible, he may ask, is this a poem? Is this a letter? Is it a prophecy? They can't quite get it right. Since other churches don't know this, they say, just have faith. However, since there is a way to the truth, we must not have a blind faith. We must find true God and believe in him. We have received Christ Ahnsahnghong, who came to this earth to rebuild Zion as our Savior. And now we are serving him as our God. It is not just because we say, let's serve him as our God. Through the Bible and the prophets, God said, I will appear on this earth in this way. If Zion, which I once established, is destroyed, I will rebuild it again. When I rebuild Zion, recognize that I am God even though I come in the flesh. Didn't God give us the Bible with this will in mind? The Bible is God's ID card. When the identity of a person is checked, the person's face is checked against the photo on the ID card, and his or her fingerprints are checked as well. The person is verified through the ID card. The Bible is telling us that the one who rebuilds Zion is God, so we must receive him and give him glory, honor, and praise. Hoping that we will be faithful witnesses who shine the glory of God the Father and God the Mother, not only in Korea, but also throughout the world, I would like to conclude this sermon. Thank you very much.